Rowan Mercer stepped off his private jet expecting to attend a memorial service for his missing mother. For 6 months, the entire town had believed Miriam Mercer was dead. The sheriff had ended the search. The church had prepared a tribute. Even Rowan's own uncle insisted it was time to stop asking questions and sell the land she left behind. But on his first night back in Montana, Rowan found fresh wolf tracks outside his mother's abandoned home. The next morning, a local hunter handed him a photograph taken deep in the mountains. In the picture stood a woman everyone thought was dead, and beside her stood 3 wild wolves. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 6 months earlier, Miriam Mercer had vanished without a trace. By the time Rowan returned home, most people had already accepted that she would never be found. The Mercer property sat on the edge of a vast stretch of mountains and forest outside a small Montana town. Rowan remembered those hills from years ago, but not much else. Success had pulled him far away. His aviation logistics company now operated across several states. His days were filled with investors, contracts, and private terminals. His mother had remained behind. At first he told himself she preferred it that way. Then he told himself he was too busy. Eventually the phone calls became shorter. The visits became less frequent. The distance between them grew so slowly that he barely noticed it happening until she disappeared. The memorial service was scheduled for the following afternoon. When Rowan arrived at the family house, the place felt frozen in time. The porch sagged slightly. Wind pushed dead leaves across the driveway. The mailbox leaned at an angle. Nothing looked like the home of a woman who had planned to leave forever. His uncle Warren was already waiting. Warren Mercer was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered and confident. He greeted Rowan with a firm handshake and a practiced expression of sadness. "Good to have you home," he said. Rowan nodded. Neither man hugged. Neither seemed comfortable enough for that. Inside, coffee sat untouched on the kitchen table. Papers were stacked neatly near the sink. Everything looked strangely organized, too organized, almost as if someone had prepared the house for visitors. Warren spent most of the evening talking about practical matters: the memorial, the property, the maintenance costs, the development proposal. That last one caught Rowan's attention. "What proposal?" he asked. Warren leaned back in his chair. "A company out of Denver wants the land. They've offered a fortune for it." Rowan frowned. "Mom wanted to sell?" The older man's eyes shifted briefly. "Not at first." "Then why are we talking about it?" Warren sighed. "Because she's gone, Rowan. We have to be realistic." The conversation ended there, but the discomfort remained. That night, Rowan couldn't sleep. The house felt empty. Every room reminded him of years he could never get back. Near midnight, he stepped outside to clear his head. The air was bitterly cold. Moonlight stretched across the yard. That was when he noticed them. Tracks. Fresh tracks, large ones. He followed them across the snow until they reached the edge of the property. Wolf tracks, several of them. The prints disappeared toward the forest behind the house. Rowan stood there for a long moment. The sheriff claimed winter storms had erased every clue months ago, yet these tracks looked recent, very recent. For reasons he couldn't explain, the sight unsettled him. The next morning, the town gathered around the church. People shook Rowan's hand. They offered sympathy. They spoke about Miriam in the past tense. Each conversation felt wrong, like everyone had agreed on a conclusion without evidence. Then a man approached him near the parking lot. His name was Calvin Rhodes, a local hunter. Rowan vaguely remembered him from years ago. Calvin looked nervous. "Can we talk somewhere private?" he asked. Minutes later, they stood beside Calvin's pickup truck. The hunter glanced around before reaching into his jacket. "I wasn't sure if I should bring this," he admitted. "What is it?" Calvin pulled out his phone. He opened a photograph. Then he handed it over. Rowan stared at the screen. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. Snow-covered mountains, a narrow valley, a small structure hidden among pine trees. Then he saw the figure standing beside it, an older woman wearing a dark winter coat. His breath caught instantly. The image was blurry. The distance was considerable. But he knew that posture. He knew the way she stood, the way she tilted her shoulders, the shape of her face. "Miriam," he whispered. Calvin nodded slowly. "I took that photo 4 days ago." Rowan's heart pounded. That's impossible, that's what I thought. Then Rowan noticed something else. 3 wolves stood several feet away from the woman. Not attacking, not threatening, simply watching, as if they belonged there, as if they knew her. Rowan looked up sharply. Where was this taken? Calvin hesitated. His face suddenly tightened. That's the strange part. He pointed toward the image, toward the small building hidden among the mountains. I've hunted these forests for 30 years, he said quietly, and I've never seen that cabin before. Rowan stared at the photograph again. The woman looked exactly like his mother, and the cabin looked like it had no right to exist. Rowan stared at the photograph so long that the image began to blur. The woman looked older, thinner. Her hair was almost completely gray now, but he knew that face. He had spent months trying not to imagine what had happened to her. Now she was standing in front of him, alive. Calvin finally broke the silence. I didn't show this to anyone else. Rowan looked up. Why not? The hunter shifted uncomfortably. Because if I'm wrong, I'd be giving false hope. And if I'm right, he paused. Then somebody needs to explain why a woman everyone says is dead is hiding in the mountains. Rowan glanced back at the photograph. The cabin bothered him almost as much as the woman. He had grown up in Montana. He knew the area well enough. Or at least he thought he did. Yet he had never seen that structure before. Where exactly was this taken? Calvin shook his head. That's the problem. I don't know. What do you mean? I was tracking elk near the northern ridge. Saw smoke, figured it might be hunters. He pointed at the image. By the time I got close enough for a picture, fog rolled in. Then I lost sight of the place completely. Rowan frowned. You couldn't find it again? The answer felt impossible. A cabin didn't simply disappear. But the man's expression suggested he wasn't lying. Before Rowan could ask another question, a voice called from across the church parking lot. Rowan. Warren. His uncle was walking toward them. The moment he arrived, Calvin stepped back. Something changed in the older hunter's face, a caution Rowan immediately noticed. Warren's eyes moved from Rowan to the photograph still in his hand. What is that? Nothing important. The response came too quickly. Warren held his gaze for several seconds. Then he smiled. Not warmly, just enough. The service starts in 10 minutes. He turned and walked away. Calvin watched him leave. Then he lowered his voice. Be careful. Rowan looked at him. Why would I need to be careful? The hunter hesitated. You know your uncle better than I do. Then he climbed into his truck and drove away. The memorial service felt wrong from the moment it began. People stood one after another and spoke about Miriam as though she had already been buried. They talked about acceptance. Moving on, letting go. Several even referred to her in the past tense. Rowan sat quietly through all of it. The photograph remained in his jacket pocket. Each speech became harder to listen to, especially because nobody seemed interested in finding answers anymore. They only wanted closure. After the service, Warren invited several community leaders to the family home. By evening, the kitchen table was covered with maps, folders, and paperwork. At first, Rowan thought they were discussing estate matters. Then he noticed the highlighted sections, property boundaries, development zones, road access plans, a real estate project, one worth millions. A man from Denver unfolded a large map across the table. This corridor alone could support over 200 luxury homes. Another pointed toward the forested area. The views are incredible. Rowan stared at them. Nobody was talking about Miriam anymore. Only land, only money. Finally, he interrupted. Did my mother approve any of this? The room became quiet. The developer glanced toward Warren. Warren folded his hands calmly. No. Then why are we discussing it? Because circumstances changed. Rowan felt irritation rising. No, circumstances didn't change. The room became even quieter. My mother disappeared. Nobody answered. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Not because Rowan won the argument, because nobody wanted to continue it in front of him. Later that evening, he found himself walking through the house alone. The silence felt heavier than before. He entered Miriam's bedroom for the first time since returning. Everything remained exactly where she had left it. Books sat beside her bed. Reading glasses rested on a nightstand. A knitted blanket remained folded neatly across a chair. For a moment, Rowan simply stood there. Guilt settled over him like weight. He had sent money. He had paid bills. He had arranged healthcare. For years, he convinced himself that was enough. Now he wasn't so sure. The room felt painfully lived in. as though she might walk through the door at any moment. Then something caught his attention. A photograph. It stood on a shelf near the window. Rowan picked it up. The picture showed Miriam beside a large pine tree somewhere in the mountains. Nothing unusual at first. Then he noticed what was behind her, a wooden structure, mostly hidden. Only part of the roof was visible. His pulse quickened. The cabin, not the same angle, not the same season, but unmistakably the same building. He turned the frame over. Written on the back in faded ink were 4 words. For when I need peace, no date, no explanation, nothing else. Rowan sat on the edge of the bed, thinking, if Miriam knew this place existed, then the photograph changed everything. She hadn't wandered into the wilderness by accident. She had gone somewhere intentionally. Someone knocked on the door. It was Warren. His uncle stepped inside without waiting. I figured I'd find you here. Rowan said nothing. Warren noticed the photograph immediately. A brief flash crossed his face. Gone almost instantly. But Rowan saw it. Where is this cabin? Rowan asked. Warren shrugged. No idea. Really. Rowan held up the picture. You've never seen it? No, the answer felt rehearsed. Warren crossed his arms. You need to stop chasing ghosts. She's not a ghost. The words came out harder than Rowan expected. A long silence followed. Then Warren sighed. Your mother was under a lot of stress. What kind of stress? Life. That's not an answer. The older man looked away. For the first time, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. Some things are better left alone. Rowan stood. Not this. Their eyes locked. Neither. Back down. Finally, Warren turned toward the door. As he reached it, he stopped. There are things you don't understand. Then explain them. But Warren simply left. A few minutes later, Rowan heard a vehicle starting outside. He moved toward the front window. Warren's truck disappeared down the road. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Rowan returned to Miriam's room and began searching more carefully. Not destroying anything, just looking. Checking drawers, boxes, bookshelves. Inside the bottom drawer of an old dresser, he found a bank statement. The date immediately caught his attention. 3 months after Miriam disappeared, his heart skipped. He checked again. Same date, same account. A withdrawal had been made. A large one. Someone had accessed Miriam Mercer's account long after she was supposedly missing. Rowan stared at the document. Then he noticed another detail. The withdrawal had been processed in person. At a bank branch less than 20 miles from the family property. His mother was either alive, or somebody had been pretending she was. And suddenly, for the first time since coming home, Rowan realized the mystery surrounding Miriam Mercer might not be a disappearance at all. It might be a crime. Rowan barely slept. The bank statement sat on the kitchen table beside his laptop. Every time he looked at it, the same question returned. Who had withdrawn that money? If Miriam had truly vanished 6 months earlier, someone should have reported suspicious activity immediately. Yet nobody had. By sunrise, Rowan had made a decision. He wasn't waiting for answers anymore. He was going to find them. The first call he made was to the bank branch listed on the statement. The manager refused to discuss account details over the phone. Privacy laws made that impossible. But after Rowan explained that his mother was still an active missing person case, the woman agreed to review public records connected to the transaction. An hour later, she called him back. I can't release personal information, she said carefully, but I can confirm the withdrawal wasn't made online. Rowan already knew that. It required physical identification. His grip tightened around the phone. So someone came into the branch. Yes. Was it my mother? A long pause followed. I'm not authorized to answer that. The answer itself was an answer. When the call ended, Rowan stared out the window. If Miriam had personally appeared at the bank 3 months after disappearing, then she had chosen to remain hidden. But why? And from whom? Around noon he drove into town. The snow from the previous week still covered the roadsides. Small businesses lined Main Street. Most looked exactly as they had years ago. Only Rowan had changed. He was richer now, more successful. Yet standing there he felt strangely powerless. At a diner near the edge of town, he met someone he trusted more than anyone else in Montana. Linda Crawford, Miriam's longtime neighbor. She was in her 70s and had lived next door for nearly 20 years. If anyone knew something, it would be her. When Rowan entered, Linda immediately stood and hugged him. The gesture caught him off guard. It had been a long time since anyone had hugged him without wanting something. You look tired, she said softly. I am. They sat together near the window. For several minutes they talked about ordinary things. Then Rowan showed her the photograph. The color drained from her face. "Oh my God. You think that's her too?" Linda nodded, without hesitation. "That's Miriam." The certainty in her voice made Rowan's chest tighten. Then why would she disappear? Linda looked away. For the first time she seemed reluctant. "Linda," she sighed. "There were arguments." "What kind of arguments? About the land?" Rowan wasn't surprised. Everything seemed connected to the land now. "Warren?" Again she hesitated, then nodded. "They fought more than once." "When?" "The last year before she vanished." This was new. Nobody had mentioned that. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Linda gave him a sad look. "Because you weren't here." The words weren't cruel. That made them hurt more. Rowan looked down at the photograph. She wasn't wrong. He had built a life hundreds of miles away. While he was signing contracts and flying between cities, his mother had been fighting battles alone. "What were they arguing about?" he asked quietly. Linda lowered her voice. "The developers." Rowan listened carefully. "Miriam believed someone was pressuring her to sell someone." "I don't know who." "You just said Warren." "I'm saying Warren wanted the deal." She leaned closer. "But Miriam thought there was more going on." "What do you mean?" Linda glanced around the diner before speaking. "About 2 months before she disappeared, she told me something strange." Rowan felt his pulse quicken. "What?" "She said people had started entering her property." "Entering?" "At night." The diner suddenly felt colder. "Did she call the sheriff?" "Twice." "What happened?" Linda laughed bitterly. "They never found anything." Rowan sat back. The pieces still didn't fit. Missing mother, hidden cabin, bank withdrawals, developers, night visitors, and now trespassers. Every answer seemed to create 2 more questions. Before leaving, Linda reached into her purse. "I almost forgot." She handed him a folded piece of paper. "Miriam gave me this months ago." Rowan unfolded it carefully. It contained a handwritten list, coordinates, several dates, a few brief notes, nothing else. "What is this?" "She told me to keep it somewhere safe." "Did she explain why?" "No." His eyes moved down the page. Then one line caught his attention. "Northern Ridge, old logging road. Traps." "Traps." The word stood alone, underlined twice. "What does this mean?" Linda shook her head. "I don't know." But Rowan knew one thing. His mother had been documenting something. Something important enough to hide. Something important enough to disappear over. That afternoon he drove toward the Northern Ridge. The road became rough quickly. Snow covered much of the terrain. Dense forest stretched in every direction. Hours passed. The coordinates led him farther from town than he expected. Eventually he reached an abandoned logging route. The place felt untouched, silent. Then he saw it, a patch of disturbed snow, fresh. Rowan parked and stepped out. The air smelled of pine and ice. Following the marks, he moved deeper into the trees. A few hundred yards later, he stopped. His stomach dropped. Steel jaws protruded from the snow. A trap, illegal, large enough to break a wolf's leg. Nearby, he found another. Then another. His mother had been right. Someone had been placing traps here. Not one, many. The realization sent anger through him. These weren't old, they had been maintained recently. Someone was still using them. Suddenly a sound echoed through the forest. A cry, sharp, painful, animal, close. Rowan turned immediately. The sound came again. This time louder. He began moving toward it. Faster now. Branches scraped his coat, snow crunched beneath his boots. Then he reached a small clearing and froze. A large grey wolf lay trapped in the snow. One front leg was caught in steel. Blood stained the white ground around it. The animal lifted its head. Amber eyes locked onto his. For a long moment neither moved. Then Rowan noticed something else. Fresh boot prints. Human boot prints. Leading away from the trap. Whoever had set it had been there recently. Very recently. And they might still be somewhere in the forest. The wolf's eyes never left Rowan. Pain radiated through the animal's body. He could see it in the trembling muscles, the shallow breaths, the way its trapped leg twitched every few seconds. Blood had frozen into the surrounding snow. For a moment, instinct told him to back away. The wolf was large, desperate. Wounded animals were unpredictable. Then the animal let out another cry. The sound cut through the forest. Not anger, pain, pure pain. Rowan slowly lowered himself into the snow. The steel trap was old but powerful. Rust covered parts of the mechanism, yet the jaws remained vicious. Someone had placed it here intentionally. Someone who expected it to catch something. His eyes drifted toward the boot prints leading away through the trees. The trapper might still be nearby. That thought should have frightened him more. Instead, he felt anger. His mother had been documenting these traps. Now he understood why. "Easy," he said quietly. The wolf bared its teeth. A low growl rolled from its throat. Rowan froze. The distance between them couldn't have been more than 6 feet. One lunge would be enough, but the wolf didn't attack. It simply watched, waiting, testing. The trap had already weakened it. Carefully, Rowan removed his gloves. The metal was freezing. His fingers immediately began to ache. He grabbed the trap's spring mechanism and pulled. Nothing happened. The jaws remained locked. The wolf jerked suddenly. Rowan fell backward into the snow. The growl deepened. His heart slammed against his ribs. For several seconds neither moved. Then the animal settled again, exhausted. The sight hit him harder than expected. The wolf wasn't dangerous right now. It was helpless, and somehow that made everything worse. Rowan moved closer. Another attempt, still nothing. The trap refused to open. He gritted his teeth, pulled harder. The rusted metal shifted slightly, just enough. Again, the mechanism groaned. The wolf cried out. Again, the spring finally snapped loose. The steel jaws opened. Instantly, the wolf ripped its leg free and stumbled backward. Rowan fell onto one knee. Snow sprayed into the air. For one terrifying second, he thought the animal might attack. Instead, it limped several yards away and stopped. The forest became silent. The wolf stood there, breathing heavily, watching him. Those amber eyes seemed strangely calm now, almost curious. Then it turned and disappeared among the trees. Gone, just like that. Rowan remained in the clearing for nearly a minute, trying to steady his breathing. Then something caught his attention. Near the trap, he noticed a small metal tag partially buried in the snow. He picked it up, a faded serial number. Nothing else. No name, no permit information. Illegal. Definitely illegal. He slipped it into his pocket. Evidence. The kind his mother would have kept. The kind somebody probably didn't want found. By the time he returned to his truck, daylight was fading. Clouds had gathered above the mountains. A storm was coming. His phone showed almost no signal. Before leaving the area, he called the county wildlife office. To his surprise, someone answered. A woman introduced herself as Clara Voss. Rowan explained what he found. The trap, the coordinates, the injured wolf, the boot prints. Silence followed. Then Clara asked a question. "Did you touch the trap?" "Yes." "Good." That wasn't the response he expected. "Good? If it was one of the traps I'm thinking about, we need it documented immediately." Rowan frowned. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then her voice lowered. "We've been finding illegal trap lines for months. Months. The same timeline as Miriam's disappearance." "What kind of trap lines?" "The organized kind." Rowan straightened. "You think poachers are operating out there?" "I think somebody has been setting dozens of traps inside protected areas." That answer stayed with him all the way home. When he arrived at the house, Warren's truck wasn't there. The absence felt almost suspicious now. Rowan entered through the kitchen. The place was dark, quiet, too quiet. He turned on the lights and immediately noticed something strange. A drawer near the dining table stood partially open. He was certain it had been closed earlier. Maybe he was imagining things, maybe not. Slowly he walked toward it. Inside were several folders. Most contained old property tax records, nothing unusual. Then he checked Miriam's bedroom. The closet door stood open. He stopped, his pulse quickened. He remembered closing it before leaving. The room looked almost unchanged. Almost. A small storage box beneath the bed had been moved several inches. Someone had searched here. The realization hit immediately. Someone else was looking for something, and they weren't being careful anymore. Rowan spent the next hour checking the rest of the house. No sign of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing stolen, at least nothing obvious. Whoever entered had either possessed a key or belonged there. The possibility narrowed the list considerably. Darkness settled outside. Snow began falling. By 9 o'clock the storm had arrived. Wind rattled the windows. Branches scraped against the roof. Rowan sat at the kitchen table reviewing everything he knew. The photograph, the cabin, the bank withdrawal, the trap line, the search of the house. The pieces felt connected. He just couldn't see how yet. Then something struck the side of the house, a sharp sound. Rowan looked up instantly. Another impact followed. This time closer. He stood. The noise came from outside the kitchen window. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, not branches, not wind. Knock, knock, knock. Every muscle tightened. He moved toward the window. Outside, snow swirled through darkness. For several seconds he saw nothing. Then a shape emerged from the storm, large, gray, standing near the fence. The wolf, the same wolf. Its injured leg was visible even from a distance. The animal wasn't wandering, it wasn't hunting. It was looking directly at the house, directly at him. Rowan stepped onto the porch. The freezing wind hit him immediately. The wolf remained motionless, watching, waiting. Then slowly it turned toward the forest, took several steps, stopped, and looked back. The message was impossible to ignore. The wolf wanted him to follow. Rowan stood on the porch as snow whipped across the yard. The wolf waited at the edge of the darkness. Its injured leg was visible whenever the moonlight broke through the storm clouds. The animal didn't move. It simply watched him, waiting. A sane man would have gone back inside. A sane man would have called the sheriff. A sane man would have remembered that people disappeared in these mountains every winter. But Rowan couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. The cabin, his mother, the bank withdrawal, the trap line. Everything pointed in one direction, the forest. Before he could second-guess himself, he grabbed his heavy coat, a flashlight, and the keys to his truck. The wolf turned immediately, as if it had known he would follow. Within minutes, Rowan was driving through the storm. The animal stayed ahead of him, appearing and disappearing between trees along the logging road. Several times he almost lost sight of it completely. Then, just as suddenly, it would reappear, always waiting, always looking back. The deeper they went into the mountains, the worse the weather became. Snow hammered against the windshield. Visibility dropped. The road narrowed. Eventually Rowan reached a point where the truck could go no farther. The wolf stood ahead on a ridge, watching, waiting. His pulse quickened. This was insane. Yet turning around felt impossible now. He left the truck and continued on foot. The cold hit immediately. Wind cut through layers of clothing. Snow reached nearly to his knees in some places. Several times he slipped. Once he nearly fell down a rocky embankment hidden beneath the snow. The wolf never came close. It remained ahead, a guide, not a companion. Nearly an hour passed, then two. Rowan lost all sense of direction. The world became white and gray, nothing else. At some point his phone lost signal entirely. He was completely alone, or so he thought. A sudden crack echoed somewhere behind him. Rowan spun around, nothing, only trees, snow, darkness. Then another sound, a distant engine. His stomach tightened. Someone else was out here. The sound lasted only a few seconds before disappearing beneath the storm, but it was enough. Someone knew these mountains well enough to travel through them at night. The possibility unsettled him. The wolf suddenly changed direction, climbing higher, faster now, as though urgency had replaced patience. Rowan followed. His legs burned, his lungs ached. Then disaster struck. A hidden patch of ice gave way beneath his boot. He crashed hard against frozen rock. Pain exploded through his right leg. For several terrifying seconds he couldn't breathe. The flashlight rolled away, snow filled his gloves. When he finally sat up, pain shot through his ankle, not broken, but bad, very bad. The wolf had stopped 20 yards ahead. It looked back, waiting again. Rowan almost laughed. The situation felt absurd. A billionaire businessman was limping through a blizzard after a wounded wolf. If someone had described it to him a week earlier, he would have dismissed it as nonsense. Yet here he was. And for the first time in years, money couldn't solve the problem in front of him. Only determination could. Slowly he pushed himself upright, then continued. The storm lasted another hour before finally weakening. The change happened gradually. The wind softened. Snowfall slowed. The sky brightened slightly. And then Rowan noticed something strange. The forest was changing. The dense pines began thinning. Rock formations appeared. Steep cliffs rose on both sides. The wolf moved between them. Rowan followed. The passage narrowed, twisted, turned sharply, then opened. He stopped breathing. Beyond the cliffs sat a hidden valley, completely sheltered from the storm. The sight felt off-purposeful. Tall pines surrounded a wide clearing. Stream cut through the center. Smoke drifted upward into the night sky. Smoke, fresh smoke. Someone was living here. The wolf descended into the valley without hesitation. Rowan stood frozen. Then he saw it. A cabin, the same cabin from the photograph, hidden among trees near the stream. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. The structure was old but sturdy. A stone chimney, a covered porch, lights glowing behind curtained windows. Someone was inside. The wolf approached the cabin and stopped, then quietly lay down near the porch steps. As if it belonged there, as if it had come home, Rowan moved forward slowly. Each step felt unreal. The closer he got, the harder it became to breathe. 6 months. 6 months of uncertainty. 6 months of guilt. 6 months of believing he had failed his mother. The porch boards creaked beneath his boots. Light spilled through the curtains. A shadow moved inside. Someone was there. His hand trembled as he reached the door. For a moment he couldn't bring himself to knock. Fear stopped him. Not fear of danger, fear of disappointment, fear that he was wrong, fear that opening the door might destroy the last fragile hope he had left. Then he heard it, a voice, an older woman's voice, soft, muffled by the walls, but familiar, painfully familiar. Rowan closed his eyes. The sound hit him harder than anything else, not because he recognized every word, because he recognized the person, his mother, alive. His hand finally touched the door. Before he could knock, the door opened from the inside. An elderly woman stood in the warm light, grey hair, thin frame, tired eyes. For several seconds neither spoke, neither moved. Then Miriam Mercer looked directly at her son, and instead of surprise, relief, or joy, Rowan saw something else in her face. Fear, real fear, as though seeing him there meant something had gone terribly wrong. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The storm whispered through the trees behind Rowan. Warm light spilled from the cabin doorway. The wolf remained near the porch, its head resting on its paws, as if this reunion had already been expected. Miriam's eyes filled first, not with relief, with dread. "Why are you here?" she asked. The question hit Rowan harder than any greeting could have. He had imagined this moment 100 different ways during the last 6 months. None of them sounded like that. "I've been looking for you." She glanced past him toward the darkness, toward the valley entrance, scanning, checking. Only after several seconds did she step aside. "Come inside." The cabin felt surprisingly comfortable. A wood stove glowed near one wall. Shelves held canned food, medical supplies, tools, and stacks of books. Everything was organized, planned. This wasn't a place someone stumbled into. This was a place someone prepared. Miriam closed the door immediately and locked it. Then she pulled the curtain shut. Only then did she finally look at Rowan again. Up close, the changes were impossible to miss. She looked thinner, more tired but not helpless, not confused, not unstable, nothing like the woman Warren had been describing. "You should not have come here," she said quietly. Rowan stared at her. "I thought you were dead." Something broke in her expression. For the first time, the fear faded. Pain took its place. "I know." The silence that followed carried 6 months of unanswered questions. 6 months of guilt, 6 months of distance. Finally, Rowan spoke. "Why didn't you contact me?" Miriam sat slowly beside the stove. For a moment she seemed older than he remembered. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had been carrying weight alone for too long. "Because I didn't know who I could trust." Rowan frowned. "You can trust me." She looked down. The answer came softly. "Could I?" The words landed exactly where they hurt. Because part of him knew she wasn't being cruel. She was being honest. For years he had stayed away, sent checks, made phone calls, missed holidays, missed dinners, missed ordinary moments that could never be replaced. Success had become an excuse, and eventually excuses became habit. "I deserve that," he admitted. Miriam's eyes softened. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." For a while neither spoke. The fire crackled between them. Outside, wind rattled the cabin walls. Then Rowan pulled the photograph from his pocket. "The town thinks you're dead." "I know. Warren thinks you're dead too?" That got her attention, immediately. A shadow crossed her face. "No." The answer came too quickly. Rowan noticed. "Warren knows you're alive." She didn't respond, which was answer enough. His pulse quickened. "You told him?" "No." "Then how does he know?" Miriam stood and walked toward a cabinet. Her movements suddenly seemed tense, guarded. The same fear Rowan had seen when she opened the door. "Warren knows because he helped create this situation." The room went still. For a second, Rowan wondered if he had heard correctly. "What does that mean?" Miriam opened a drawer and removed several folders, old folders, thick with paperwork. She carried them to the table. For a long moment she simply stared at them, as if deciding whether she was finally ready. Then she opened the first one. Inside were copies of bank statements, letters, property records, insurance documents. Some were years old, others were recent. Rowan sat down beside her. "What am I looking at?" "Evidence." His stomach tightened. Evidence of what? She slid one document across the table. A proposal from a development company. The same company Warren had discussed after the memorial service. The numbers were staggering. Millions. Far more than Rowan expected. They wanted this land badly, Miriam said. I know. No. She shook her head. You don't. Her finger tapped the paper. This wasn't the first offer. She opened another folder, then another. Offer after offer, year after year. The amounts kept increasing. Each one rejected. Each one signed by Miriam. Never by Warren, never by anyone else. Miriam refused repeatedly, Rowan said quietly, because selling wasn't the issue. What was? Her eyes lifted. The valley. Rowan frowned. What valley? For the first time, she looked genuinely surprised. Warren never told you? Told me what? A long silence followed. Then she opened another folder. Inside lay an old photograph. The edges were yellowed with age. The image showed a man standing beside a cabin. Very same cabin. Snow covered the ground around him. Mountains rose in the distance, and near the edge of the picture stood several wolves. Not close, not tame. Simply watching. Rowan stared. His heart skipped. Who is that? My father. Rowan looked again. The resemblance was obvious. The jawline, the eyes, the posture. His grandfather. The man who had built much of the Mercer landholding decades earlier. What is this place? The reason Warren wants the property. The answer raised even more questions. Miriam reached beneath the photograph. There was a letter attached, folded carefully, protected in plastic. The original document is somewhere else, she said, but I kept a copy. What's in it? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the window, toward the darkness beyond the glass, as though remembering something painful. Then her voice lowered. Your grandfather discovered something here before he died. Rowan leaned forward. What? A secret worth millions. The words hung in the room. Money, land, disappearances, developers. Suddenly everything seemed connected, and yet nothing made sense. If that's true, Rowan said slowly, why didn't he tell anyone? Miriam's expression changed, something between sadness and anger. He did. Rowan frowned. What happened? Her eyes met his. Warren found out first. The room became silent again. Outside, the wolves began howling somewhere beyond the trees. Not one wolf, several. The sound echoed through the valley. Miriam looked toward the door. Fear returned instantly, stronger than before. Then Rowan heard it too, a distant engine, somewhere beyond the cliffs. Someone was coming into the valley. The engine noise grew louder. Miriam was already moving. Years of fear had apparently taught her not to waste time. She gathered the folders from the table and shoved them into a weathered metal box sitting beneath a shelf. Her hands moved quickly, but Rowan noticed something else. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind many times before. How many people know about this place? Rowan asked. Very few. Then who is that? Miriam locked the metal box and looked toward the door. I don't know. The answer worried him more than certainty would have. Outside, the wolves were no longer howling. They were moving. Rowan could hear them circling somewhere beyond the cabin. The behavior seemed deliberate, alert, warning. The engine stopped. Silence followed. Heavy silence, the kind that made every small sound feel dangerous. Then came another noise, a vehicle door slamming. Someone had arrived. Rowan stepped toward the window. Miriam grabbed his arm immediately. No, her voice was sharp, urgent. Stay away from the glass. He obeyed. The reaction alone told him enough. This wasn't the first time. Whoever was out there had come before. Several minutes passed. Nothing happened. No voices, no footsteps, no knocking. Just silence. Then a beam of light swept briefly across the trees. Flashlight. Someone was searching. The wolves began growling, low, distant, several of them. The sound echoed through the valley. Then a shout erupted somewhere beyond the clearing. A man's voice, angry. Another voice answered. Then suddenly everything went quiet again. The interruption seemed to surprise even Miriam. She slowly exhaled. They're leaving. You know who they are? No, but you've heard them before. She nodded more than once. The answer sent a chill through Rowan. People had been hunting this place. Not recently, repeatedly. After another 15 minutes, the valley became silent again. No engine, no lights, nothing. Only then did Miriam relax slightly. The wolves returned near the porch, guardians resuming their watch. Rowan looked toward the metal box. We're not waiting anymore. Miriam studied him. What are you saying? I'm saying we're finishing this. For the first time since arriving, Rowan sounded like the man who built a company from nothing. Decisive, focused, done running. I'm contacting people I trust. Miriam hesitated. Rowan, no. His voice remained calm, firm. I spent 6 months grieving someone who wasn't dead. The words landed heavily between them. I won't lose more time. Miriam looked away. Pain flickered across her face, because she knew he wasn't entirely talking about the last 6 months. He was talking about years neither of them could recover. Without another word, Rowan pulled out his satellite communicator from his emergency hiking gear. No cell signal existed in the valley, but the device connected. Slowly, after several attempts, he finally reached Clara Voss. The wildlife officer answered immediately. Rowan? Relief filled her voice. We've been trying to contact you. His stomach tightened. Why? Because someone broke into your mother's property yesterday. He exchanged a glance with Miriam. A searched house. It hadn't been imagination. Did they find anything? We don't know. What else? A pause. Then Clara lowered her voice. We found something connected to the traps. Rowan sat forward. What? Financial records. The answer surprised him. Financial records? The serial numbers from some of the trap equipment led to a supply company. His pulse quickened. And? The purchases weren't made by random hunters. Silence. Then Clara continued. They were purchased through a tracking business connected to one of the development groups interested in Mercer land. The room became still. Even Miriam seemed shocked. Until now, everything had been suspicion, circumstantial. This was different. Evidence. Not proof, but evidence, and evidence could grow. Can you send me everything? Rowan asked. I already started. The transmission took nearly 20 minutes. When it finished, Rowan began reviewing the files. Invoices, shipping records, equipment orders, business registrations. Most looked ordinary, until one name appeared. Mercer Valley Development Partners. The same company from Miriam's folders. The same company pushing to buy the land. The same company Warren kept mentioning. A coincidence was becoming harder and harder to believe. Hours passed. The storm weakened outside. Miriam finally opened the metal box again. This time she removed additional documents. Some were legal records, others were handwritten notes. One folder appeared much older than the rest. Its edges were worn, its paper yellowed. Carefully she handed it to Rowan. My father left this. He opened it slowly. Inside were copies of trust documents, land surveys, letters. The further he read, the more confused he became. The property wasn't simply land. The protected valley sat above extensive mineral deposits. Valuable deposits, extremely valuable. Enough to explain decades of pressure. Enough to explain developers spending millions. Enough to explain greed. But one detail stood out immediately. The trust restricted all future development. Strictly, aggressively. The language was unusual, almost personal, as if Rowan's grandfather had desperately wanted something protected. Why? Rowan asked. That's the question. Miriam pointed toward another document, a sealed letter, different from the others, older. The envelope remained intact, unopened. His grandfather's name appeared on the front. Beneath it were specific instructions, to be opened only if the valley is threatened. Rowan stared. Why haven't you opened it? Miriam looked exhausted. Because I was waiting. For what? For someone I could trust. The answer hit him harder than expected, not because it praised him, because it revealed how alone she had been. For months, maybe years, protecting secrets nobody else even understood. Rowan picked up the envelope, his fingers brushed the seal, then he stopped. Something caught his attention. There was writing on the back, small writing, barely visible. A second note, different ink, different handwriting. His heart immediately accelerated. This isn't Granddad's writing. Miriam frowned. What? He turned the envelope toward her. The moment she saw it, all color disappeared from her face. She whispered only one word. Warren. The note had been added later, years later, and whatever Warren had written on the back of that sealed letter had been intentionally hidden from everyone. Rowan carefully turned the envelope over. The note was short, only 2 lines, written in faded blue ink. Do not open this letter unless Miriam is present, and beneath it, some truths belong to the living, not the dead. The handwriting unmistakably belonged to Warren. Miriam stared at the words, her expression hardened. He added that after my father died. How do you know? Because the envelope never looked like this before. She reached for it. Her fingers brushed the paper almost reverently. Not because of Warren, Because of the man who had written the original letter inside. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she sat down. He always wanted control. Rowan remained quiet. Miriam wasn't talking about the letter anymore. She was talking about Warren, about years, maybe decades. After your grandfather died, Warren became obsessed with the property. Her voice sounded tired, not angry, just exhausted. The rest of us grieved. Warren studied maps. The words hung in the air. He believed there was something hidden here, the mineral deposits. Miriam nodded. Eventually he found evidence. Rowan glanced toward the stacks of documents. And Granddad already knew, long before anyone else. The answer raised an obvious question. If the deposits were worth millions, why protect the land instead of developing it? Miriam looked toward the window, toward the dark valley beyond. The letter may explain that. May, not would, may. Even now she wasn't making assumptions. That alone told Rowan how seriously she treated the truth. He respected that. After everything that had happened, facts mattered. Outside, dawn slowly approached. The storm had weakened. Grey light crept into the valley. The wolves remained near the cabin. Their presence felt strangely comforting now. Not magical, not mystical, simply familiar, like neighbors who happened to walk on 4 legs. Miriam noticed him watching them. They weren't always here. What changed? She smiled faintly. The traps. Rowan listened. For years she had reported illegal traps to wildlife authorities. Many were never found. Others appeared again within weeks. She began checking trails herself, removing what she could, reporting the rest. Several times she helped injured animals survive long enough for rescue teams to arrive, including wolves, especially wolves. The town hated that. Rowan wasn't surprised. Some people thought I cared more about animals than people. Did you? She laughed softly. No. Then her expression became serious. I just didn't believe cruelty should be rewarded. The answer stayed with him. Simple, direct. The kind of principle people admired until it became inconvenient. A few hours later, Rowan finally contacted an attorney from Denver. Someone outside the local network, someone Warren couldn't influence. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When it ended, Rowan felt slightly better. Not because the situation was improving, because he finally had structure, a plan. The attorney instructed him to preserve every document, every photograph, every communication. Nothing should leave the valley without copies. Nothing should be trusted without verification. It was exactly what Rowan intended to do. Before noon, Clara arrived. The wildlife officer entered the valley on a snowmobile. The wolves watched her approach but didn't interfere. That alone told Rowan plenty. They recognized her, or at least didn't fear her. Clara immediately began reviewing the evidence. Trap records, photographs, financial documents, property records. The deeper she looked, the more concerned she became. This is bigger than I thought. Rowan leaned forward. What did you find? She pulled out several pages. 3 separate trapping sites were established inside protected areas. We know that, she nodded, but now we know who was financing them. The room grew quiet. Clara placed several invoices on the table. Business names, equipment purchases, vehicle rentals, fuel expenses, nothing dramatic by itself, until the ownership structures were traced. The money ultimately led back to entities connected to Mercer Valley Development Partners. The same development group, again, and again. Coincidences were disappearing, patterns were emerging. Miriam looked pale. What were they trying to accomplish? Clara answered carefully. If enough wildlife incidents occurred, environmental protections could be challenged. Rowan frowned. Meaning, the easier it becomes to argue the area isn't suitable for conservation. Silence followed. The strategy was ugly, but believable, exactly the kind of thing profit could motivate. Then Clara revealed something worse. 2 trappers were questioned last month. Everyone looked up. What happened? Rowan asked. They refused to cooperate. Why? They said they worked for someone local. The room became still. And? Clara's eyes settled on Rowan. They wouldn't give a name. The implication didn't need explanation. Later that afternoon, Clara left with copies of the documents. She promised to involve state investigators if necessary. For the first time, Rowan felt genuine momentum. Not certainty, momentum, a path forward. But that evening brought something unexpected. While organizing files, Miriam opened another storage box hidden beneath a floorboard near the stove. The compartment was so well concealed Rowan would never have found it himself. Inside sat old journals, letters, maps, and dozens of photographs. Most featured the valley, the cabin his grandfather, the wolves. Years of history preserved carefully. Then one photograph caught Rowan's attention. Immediately, his heart skipped. The image showed his grandfather standing beside another man. The picture was old, very old. The second man's face was partially obscured by shadows, but something about him seemed familiar, disturbingly familiar. Rowan looked closer, then closer still. The posture, the build, even the shape of the jaw. A memory surfaced, a photograph hanging in Warren's office. Not the same image, the same man. His pulse quickened. Miriam looked up. "What is it?" Rowan handed her the photograph. The moment she saw it, confusion crossed her face, then surprise, then something else. Recognition. Slow recognition. Her eyes widened. No, the word barely escaped her lips. "What?" She took the photograph toward the window, studied it again and again. Then she looked directly at Rowan. "The man standing next to your grandfather," her voice trembled. "He isn't who we always thought he was." Before Rowan could ask another question, she reached behind the photograph. Something had been taped to the back. A folded document, hidden there for decades. And across the outside, written in his grandfather's handwriting, were 6 words that changed everything. "If this is found, verify Warren." The document hidden behind the photograph was not a map to money. It was something far more dangerous. The truth. Rowan unfolded the yellowed pages carefully while Miriam watched in silence. The first section contained notarized statements from decades earlier. The second contained correspondence between his grandfather and an environmental trust. The final pages explained everything Warren had spent years trying to bury. His grandfather had known about the mineral deposits beneath the valley. He had also known what mining would do to it. The letter described streams that would disappear, wildlife corridors that would be destroyed, entire sections of forest that would be stripped away. Then came the line that changed how Rowan understood his grandfather forever. "The land was never our wealth. The land is our responsibility." Rowan read the sentence twice, then a third time. Suddenly the unusual restrictions in the trust made sense. The protected valley wasn't an accident. It was the purpose. His grandfather had intentionally structured the estate so future generations could not easily sell or develop the land, unless every legal condition was met. Conditions Warren had spent years trying to bypass. The remaining evidence filled the gaps. Bank records, property transfers, communications between Warren and development representatives. Nothing alone proved criminal wrongdoing. Together they revealed a pattern: pressure, manipulation, financial self-interest. Most damaging of all was a recorded conversation recovered through the broader investigation. It didn't prove Warren had caused Miriam's disappearance, but it revealed something else. He had knowingly allowed everyone to believe she was dead, because her absence made the land easier to control. The fallout came slowly, then all at once. Independent attorneys reviewed the trust documents. State investigators examined the development records. The environmental trust confirmed the original restrictions were valid. The proposed development collapsed within weeks. Investors withdrew. Partners distanced themselves. Projects were suspended. The land could not legally be transformed into the profitable venture Warren had promised. For the first time in years, money stopped moving the story. Truth did. Warren fought back. At first, he challenged documents, questioned memories, claimed misunderstandings, but every new review uncovered more contradictions. Every new witness confirmed another piece of Miriam's account. Eventually, the fight drained away, not because he confessed to everything, because there was nothing left to control. The estate board removed his authority over family affairs. His business relationships suffered. People who once followed him began keeping their distance. The consequences weren't dramatic, they were real, and somehow that felt more fitting. One afternoon, several months later, Rowan stood beside Miriam outside the cabin. Spring had finally reached the valley. Snow remained only in distant shadows. The stream flowed freely again. The wolves appeared occasionally along the tree line. Never close, never tame, just present. Miriam watched one of them disappear between the pines. "They were never protecting me," she said quietly. Rowan smiled. "No?" She shook her head. "They were protecting what they trusted." The answer felt right. Years earlier, his grandfather had chosen compassion over destruction. Years later, Miriam had continued that choice. removing traps, reporting poachers, helping injured animals when nobody was watching. The wolves hadn't kept her alive, they had simply learned she wasn't a threat. Trust built slowly, across years, across generations, the same way families were supposed to. Rowan looked around the valley. When he first arrived in Montana, he had intended to stay only long enough for a memorial service. Now everything felt different. The company still existed, the business still needed him. But something had shifted. Success no longer felt complete by itself. For years he believed responsibility meant sending money, paying bills, handling problems from a distance. The valley had forced him to confront a harder truth. Presence mattered, sometimes more than resources, sometimes more than success. A few days later, the conservation agreement became official. The protected status of the valley was strengthened permanently. Future development restrictions were reinforced. The environmental trust accepted stewardship responsibilities alongside the family. The place his grandfather fought to protect would remain intact. Not forever. Nothing lasted forever, but longer than greed had intended. That evening, Rowan found Miriam sitting on the cabin porch. The sunset painted the mountains gold. Neither spoke for a while. The silence felt comfortable now, not empty, just peaceful. Finally, Miriam looked at him. "You don't have to stay." He understood what she meant. The choice was his, always had been. He looked toward the forest, toward the valley, toward the life waiting elsewhere, then back at his mother. "No," he said softly, "but I want to." Her eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic tears, not the kind people noticed from across a room, the quiet kind. The kind that appeared when a wound finally stopped getting deeper. Neither pretended the lost years had disappeared. Neither pretended everything was fixed. Some damage remained. Some questions would never have perfect answers. But they had the truth, and they had time. For now, that was enough. As darkness settled over the valley, a distant howl echoed from somewhere beyond the trees. Another answered, then another. The sound drifted across the mountains before fading into the night. Miriam smiled. Rowan listened, and for the first time since returning home, he felt exactly where he belonged. If you had one chance to return before it was too late, would you take it? Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next story.